call meeting to order 133, Finance Admin and Police Subcommittee. I call a roll call. I'm Mayor Lance. We'll go around the table to my left.
Gus Walter, City Council Member.
David Kelly, City Manager.
Chris Parker, Chief, please. Kevin Thompson, Assistant City Manager, Community Development Director.
Daniel Frankston from Cloverdale. And on virtual, we have.
Alex Mogg from the City Attorney's Office.
Thank you, sir.
And I'll note, Mayor Chair, that our Finance Director, Susie Holmes, is out of the office today.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, B, public comments. The public may speak on any item not listed on the agenda at this time. If anyone from the public would like to make a public comment, seeing none, and we have no attendees listed in virtual, we will move on to D, approval of minutes from last meeting.
No minutes were included on this agenda. They'll be included on the next agenda.
Perfect. All right, moving into new business. EA discussion, mobile home rent control ordinance.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll introduce this item and then turn it over to our City Attorney, Alex Mogg, to give you more details. Previous meeting, the subcommittee discussed the desire to update our mobile home rent control ordinance. Our current ordinance is out of date. It doesn't reflect the current law. And the direction was to proceed with drafting a new ordinance. We did have some residents who wanted additional details about the how rent control was managed by the city in the past. And because of the lack of good history in terms of documenting former rent increases by mobile home parks, it made that task very challenging. So I think it kind of triggers the need to update our mobile home ordinance, and our city attorney has been doing background work on researching what other cities have adopted in terms of rent control or other land use restrictions to address space rent increases within our mobile home parks. Mobile home parks within the city are, a significant source of affordable housing for our members of our community. And rent control is one mechanism to ensure that their affordability is maintained for existing residents. So in drafting an ordinance, there are some key policy decisions around what are allowable rent increases, addressing vacancy control, establishment of a body to address concerns or complaints about the rental rates, as well as if council decides to formally establish a new ordinance, what date to use for establishing base rent. And then there's kind of an ancillary issue is whether to also establish additional land use controls, and I think our city attorney will opine on that a little bit, which include things like establishing a zoning overlay for mobile home parks. Some cities within Sonoma County have done that to try to provide an additional layer of protection. Kind of one of the key goals too is looking at the rent control ordinances in effect by other Sonoma County cities and trying to develop some consistency in the application of rules so often we'll do is look at what are the other cities that have enacted similar ordinances, what are their practices, and that's something that again our city attorney will kind of cover as part of this presentation. So with that, Alex, I'll turn it over to you to kind of give an overview of some of the key policy issues related to mobile ordinance.
Thanks, David. Good
Can I-
afternoon, Mayor. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, council member.
Quick question, Alex, before you get started. I was always under the impression that the mobile home parks were governed by the DMV.
Yeah, so they're it's a good question, and they are in some ways. So like building code issues within the park are governed by HCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development. So if there are building code issues, or if someone wants to add an awning onto their area or build a deck around it, that's all dealt with through HCD for the most part, not the city. They don't come to the city for a building permit, for example, but the city still has the control over sort of police powers to establish rules regarding rent and other similar issues like that.
Thank you, Alex.
And Alex, if I can just
Yeah.
add to the question about DMV, so often these mobile homes may, it depends on the type, but some of them may have been operable vehicles in the past, but once you formally affix those by way of a permanent foundation, they typically transition from a DMV regulated vehicle to a mobile home regulated by HCD.
Yeah, and you'll see like state law has all these technical definitions about what's a motor home, what's a mobile home, we sort of are using mobile home very broadly here to encompass any vehicle structure that might be put up or parked in one of these parks to serve, for residents. So just a little bit of background to make for the committee before we dive into some of these issues. Like David mentioned, there is an existing ordinance. As far as we can tell, it's never been enforced. State law has all these special regulations regarding mobile home parks, but they do explicitly allow cities to adopt rent control provisions for mobile home parks. However, what courts, and this is for any type of rent control, what courts have said is that park owners, apartment building owners are entitled to a fair return on their investment, which means that they get a fair and reasonable return. So how that's usually measured is basically you should be able to make the same profit, the year before we adopted the rent increase the rent control ordinance as you did the year after. That's sort of the rough, if you're making the same profit, we assume that you're getting a fair and just return. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but sort of roughly this similar. And then the other thing to keep in mind when we're talking about rent control for mobile home parks that's different than a apartment building is, in general, what you are renting is the space, and usually you own the mobile home itself, but you rent the space. But although we call them mobile homes, you can't really move them. And so if the space rent goes up a lot and you can't afford that, you're left with basically having to abandon your home or your asset there. You can move them, but a lot of times they're in such bad shape that it's not feasible. Or there's no place to move them to. There's only a limited number of parks in the state. They're all very full in this high demand. So with that in mind, these ordinances can be very long. You might have a definition and that's a whole page long. And so rather than have the ordinance be the first thing the committee considered, I wanted to get the committee's feedback on just these key issues. And these are the issues that really the council and the public cares about when we think about these ordinances. So the first issue is, what will the allowable rent increase be? And this is each year, the park owners will be able to increase the rent for the mobile home spaces by this amount automatically without having to seek any special approvals or anything. They'll be able to increase it this amount automatically. So there's a chart showing what other agencies in Sonoma County do. And over the last year, there's been a lot of changes as there's been some consolidation. It used to be more varied. But you can see that in general, this is based on CPI. You could have it based on a percentage of CPI or just CPI, usually up to a cap. So just by way of example, for Sonoma County, it's 70% of CPI or 4%, whichever is less. So the rent increase is never going to be higher than 4%. It's also never gonna be 100% of CPI. So there's that. So I defer, Mayor, whether you want me to go through each of the issues or stop after each one for some time for you to discuss and provide direction.
Would you do this?
Well, I've got a question.
No, the questions stay
Yeah.
fresh.
Yeah. Well, you know, I guess the basic question is we're looking at this because of a complaint we received from a renter of a mobile park facility. So I guess the question begs to be asking, if we're gonna tackle rent control on this, are we looking at rent control throughout the city on rentals? How involved do we want to get on that?
Yeah, well,
I guess
that
that's my question.
that is of course up to the council. I would defer to you. That's not something we're looking at currently. A lot of cities in Sonoma County have rent control for mobile home parks, and don't have rent control for other types of units, and you don't have to have both. I'm not a policymaker, but I would guess there's sort of more desire to do it for rent control based on that unique nature where like you own a structure, but you don't own the space underneath it. It creates some issues there. But right now, we haven't received direction to do rent control citywide. So we're not preparing that. I would note that state law for rent control for normal types of residential units, you can't apply that on single family homes or on any buildings built after 1995. So it takes out a lot of the housing stock in the city, wouldn't be eligible for it anyway. But so just with, hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
So any other questions first off from anyone else here? Alex, my first question is, I'm looking at all the percentages that everyone gives here and who has rent control for mobile home parks. They're all better off financially than we are. We have a lower income population than anyone on that list. And so I would want to make sure that we were comparable to that, to where we're staying on the low end and not on the high end of this, because I mean, we're the last chance for a lot of people, and I want to make sure that they have somewhere to go. And so when I'm looking at this, I think it looks like, I don't know if Sebastopol with 3% or 75% is the lowest, or if it's a 4% with 70, I'd have to try to work the numbers. But it becomes 6 to 1, half dozen of the other, really. But I would really want to make sure that we're doing what's best for our community, keeping in mind that we are the last chance for a lot of people before they leave to other counties, Lake County, Mendocino County.
Yeah, and of course, I defer entirely to you two. I think having it be a percentage of CPI. I mean, people's incomes don't rise as fast as CPI often, but at least you're ensuring that it's not growing too much, because it's just a percentage of CPI. But I would defer to you. We could certainly whatever, do the 3% if that's what the committee wanted. And I think just for reference for the committee, part of why we're coming to you is these ordinances can be hot button issues. And so we didn't want to put out a draft that put in a number there, even though the number is not final, just even have the first draft published and circulating out in the public without any sort of direction or buy-in from the committee. So the direction we received from you today isn't final, and we'll bring these same issues to the full council, but we wanted your feedback on sort of what the first draft should be.
Because when I'm going through the agencies that actually have these rent controls, there's 8 of them listed on here. 5 of them have a 4% or a 70% basically.
Mm-hmm.
One of them has a 3%, one has a 6%, and then one has 80% of the CPI. It's totally different. So the majority keep it at 4%.
Yeah.
Or 70% of the CPI type of deal. I would like to stay on the low end. So I was thinking 3% or 70% because it, like I said, I mean, I gave my reasons. So I don't know what you think, you know, you've been here a lot longer than I have, and you might have been part of the original.
Well, I agree with you. I'd like to see it on the lower end. A lot of the, well, I shouldn't say a lot of, there's really only two significant ones in town. And one of them is just a total mess. And you can just tell that no money's being put back into the park, and the other one is kind of maintained okay.
Yep.
So I kind of agree that we should really be low, and I'd like to see it tied to a percentage of the CPI increase. Again, I mean, over the last 3 years, if I'm not mistaken, the first two were like, every year was like a 7 or 8% increase. And then last year was more back in line with a 3%. Well, on those 7 and 8 year CPI increases, I'd hate to see a landlord just grab all 7% or 8%.
Yeah.
So
Great.
my
Great.
feelings on the lower cabinet, like maybe a 3% of the increase in the CPI, or
Exactly.
and
So like a 3% or 75% of CPI.
yeah, I don't know what the number is,
So
but
if you did, if it was a 4% CPI, 75%, you'd hit 3% again.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
So you have to go above 4%. Anything above 4% of the CPI, you're not gonna get more than 3% on your charge.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like that's about as low as we can go really for our, and we might get pushback for this, I don't know, but I'm trying to keep this low starting point, this is as low as we can go.
do we know what Briarwood is charging offhand?
That would be it.
No, okay.
And Mayor, one thing, you know, we'll talk about this later, but if the park's not making money, there's a process for them to apply for a special increase, and they may be entitled to it. But one thing you see here is, you know, I've experienced this in other places too, is parks complain a lot about these amounts, and then they never really seek those increases because turns out they're still making money and they don't want to open up their books to the city to review. You know, doesn't mean it never happens, but you hear a lot more complaints than you hear people making the request.
Perfect, thank you.
As far as like for Briarwood, I know I saw there was a unit that's for sale, and the fees for
Yes.
that were, I think it was $11.75 a month.
$11.50 a month.
Yeah, just
For the
for that.
space.
Yeah,
Yeah, $11.50 a month for the space, I just looked at it last night.
Yeah.
yeah, and that's, you know, I mean, obviously there's been no rent control to date, so
Right.
that, you know, that creates a problem.
Okay, so you have direction for that.
So what I heard was 3% or 70% of CPI, whichever is less.
Yeah, and if 75% is easier for numbers, I don't care, but that keeps it very low.
Okay. So the next issue is vacancy control, which is relevant for the example that just came up. So vacancy control is when a unit is vacated and someone new comes in. Can you raise the rent or not? Or do you have to, can you raise it more than you could otherwise? So for apartments, normal apartments, state law says you can't have vacancy control. And so someone who owns an apartment in San Francisco, for example, that's rent controlled, when the tenant moves out, they can raise the rent as much as they want. So here the question is, do we want vacancy control for the mobile home park? And so there are a couple of options. One is no vacancy control. You say when someone moves out and someone new comes in, you can raise the rent as much as you want. A second issue is vacancy control only for in-place transfers. So this would be an example of you're selling the mobile home, it's not moving, but there's some sort of, the tenants are going to change, but the same mobile home is going to be there on that spot. Maybe there'll be a limit and how much the rent increase could be then. And another option is vacancy. You see this in some cities in the Bay Area. They don't have vacancy control except following an eviction. And the point there is, I guess, to discourage evictions. You don't want landlords to buy a park and then try to evict everyone so they can raise the rent. So when there's natural turnover, they're allowed to, but under this scenario, they're not. Or there's also an option of a more limited vacancy control where you can't raise it all the way to market, but you're allowed to raise it more than you would otherwise. You know, maybe you can raise it by 10%. Or I've seen some cities that have sort of a formula. They say you can raise the rent as high as you want, but it can't be above sort of, you know, the 90th percentile of rents for your park as is. So, you know, you get to increase it a little bit, but not, you know, a huge amount. When the Board of Supervisors considered this, they reviewed all the cities in Sonoma County, and only, I believe, 3 of them had vacancy control at all, and it was for those in-place transfers. And for those in-place transfers, where someone bought a mobile home and was going to move into the unit, they allowed the rent to be increased by between 5 and 15%. I think each city had a different amount, so it's 5, 10, and 15% that the rent could be raised when that happened. And just one final piece of information to think about. What you'll hear from mobile home parks is that owners sometimes is that this transfers value from the property owner to the mobile home park owner, because if think about 2 spaces, if they both have a mobile home on it, and one the rent for one is $500 and the rent for the other is $700, and they both have rent control, you'll be willing to pay more to buy the mobile home on the space with $500 dollar a month rent, because you'll be getting that rent rather than the $700 dollar an hour one. So, you know, without vacancy, with no type of vacancy control, it sort of lowers the value of mobile homes. With vacancy control, it raises the value of mobile homes, because someone would be willing to pay more for a mobile home in, you know, the city that's under that control than someplace else where their rent might be higher.
So now if you're saying that if there's no rent control, it's better for the tenant because the price of the lot is going to stay lower.
If it's the opposite, so if there is vacancy, if the park owner can raise the rent when someone moves out, that's worse for the tenant because people will be willing to pay less for that. Whereas if they can buy into a lower rent, that raises the value of the unit.
I just wonder how many different rents that somebody like Briarwood has, or is everybody hit with the same stick? You know,
Yeah.
because there's no rent control now, so I don't know, that would be interesting.
Well,
But-
and one thing we could consider, another issue we could circle back with at the end of the meeting, is normally when you have a rent control ordinance, we can also, not everyone does this, but we could do a rent registry where part of the ordinance is a requirement for the park owner to submit that information annually to the city. And that way, you know, we have that information. You can see, is the ordinance working or not?
Well, I guess basically, however we word it, what I'm looking at is not having the rents go up because somebody moves.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same unit on the same patch of land, providing the same services. I don't think it should not be viewed as an opportunity for the landlord to gouge the tenant. You know, I'd like to see it stay the same. Inherit the current rate. That would be my feelings. I don't know.
Anyone else want to make a comment? Or go? Let me go real quick and then I'll go to you, just so it stays in the proper order. So I agree with Gus on the in-place transfers, like he was talking about, so that, you know, the trailer is staying on the spot, there's no rent increase. I also think following the evictions, that we should. Now with the, I've done a lot of work in trailer parks through my job, and I know that what it costs for when someone does move out, for that owner of the trailer park to go in there, rehab the spot, update it to code, and prep it for a new trailer. I know how much it costs. So there needs to be some ability for them to be able to maintain. But so like, if they were evicting people to move someone else in to get a higher number, I don't agree with that. But there needs to be something to where if a trailer does move off, they can, and I think that's where you go with your limited vacancy control underneath. So those three, I'm good with of some sort, because they do need to recoup the money that they put back into the spot to prep it for the new trailers.
Okay, so that we can certainly do that. What I'm hearing is basically vacancy control with no change allowed, no increase allowed, except you could increase it when a space, if the mobile home park is, removed.
It's vacated and
Okay, yeah.
and being updated
Yeah, and
without eviction.
And maybe, Mr. Mayor, it could be crafted in such a way that it's a one-time fee for lot preparation as opposed to ongoing in perpetuity at a high rent rate, so. I think there's a couple of things to think about. on that.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Daniel?
I think both of you have very good reasoning, and whatnot. I take a little bit of a different approach. From my perspective, the problem is affordable housing, and you're stuck in your house and you can't move even though there's raised rents. So in spite of the fact that I'm an advocate for price controls and whatnot, I think, when a unit is truly vacant, I'm perfectly fine with letting the rate float to whatever the market will bear. And one, it gives a return for the owner, but the other thing that it does is it also defers the increases for the other tenants. Because if the landlord is making more money off of a new tenant because they've been able to raise the rent, well, then their justification for anything above and beyond the minimum that's allowed would have to be shown on the numbers in it. So from my perspective, having a vacant unit be free for the landlord to do it, that's great. I agree wholeheartedly with you, Mr. Mayor, with regards to evictions and in place. I do think, though, I would be in favor of a nominal, like a 5% increase. The reason I wouldn't want it larger is because you don't want to create incentives for landlords to evict the people from their spaces. On the other hand, 5%, given what it costs to evict someone, is probably not going to give them the incentive they need to really get them out. So I think like a 5% in place and 5% evictions would be fine. Also, I understand that a lot of the in place transfers are amongst family members now. So even though if there is a transfer, it's like from dad to child or husband to wife or sister, etc. So I think those are all appropriate measures to put in place regarding vacancy.
Thank you. It's funny you guys brought up the Briarwood property that's for sale. It's been that way for about 4 to 6 months. And seeing that property sit there, even if somebody would want to go in and buy it and rent it out, I'm like, I could never profit from it because it's $1,150 a month just to park it there. And so that told me it's too high, and that's why it's sitting there, because the price is only 250 grand for the whole thing. So I'm like, what is the deterrent? And I think it's the price of the rent that you pay on top of your unit. And so that's something that made me think the way I was is, maybe they price themselves out of the market to where even a brand new modular is now not worth it. I don't know. That's where my thought process had come from when I was looking at this.
Are you telling me that there's a unit in Briarwood that's selling for over 200,000?
There's a brand new single wide they just put in there. I watched them do it when I was doing some work at another one. And they brought a new one in, cleaned up the area and poured concrete out front, and they're selling for $255,000.
The Thompsons must be doing that as owners of the property. Yeah.
And their rent space on top of that is not $1,150. So you're talking about $3,000 a month to live in a trailer in Briarwood.
Mayor, if I can just, I hear support for the limited vacancy control, and so I think there, again, it's, the city attorney has presented some options. One is a flat percentage based on existing rates, and this is like 10%. The other option is that you set it as a percentile of existing rents in the park. So with that, it seems like you're trying to ensure some parity amongst the rent spaces. I think there may be a challenge there is on administration a little bit, just because you have to make sure what the 80th percentile rents are, and that would kind of tie into probably some kind of requirement that we want the annual rent registry.
They're spending a lot of time in their books.
Yeah. So,
The flat percentage might, from an administrative perspective, probably gives a little more certainty, but again, it's an option.
I certainly agree with David that a flat percentage, it's easier for easier for the park, easier for the residents, easier for the city to know what's allowed and what's not.
And Alex, did you see, your survey work said between 5 and 15%?
Yeah, my recollection is there are 3 cities out of the group or who allow it, and I think it was 5, 10, and 15. But that only applied for in-space transfer. So if the unit was removed from the site and a new unit was put in, there was no limit on how much you could increase the rent in those cities.
You thinking, yes, see,
Well, I'm thinking it's somewhat frustrating because, you know, if the landlord actually replaced the unit, that's one thing. But if a tenant came in and said, well, I want to rent your lot and I'm bringing in a brand new trailer, it's like, you know, the landlord is a win-win. And the tenant actually has to burden that. So, I mean, I think this is gonna be the first run at it. And
Absolutely.
We'll tweak it as we go, but, you know, I'd like to chew on that a little
Right.
more.
So, okay, but for,
I guess the question, I hate to jump in here, is this, if we pass this rent control, how do we as a city police it? Is it gonna be complaint driven or is it gonna be an annual audit?
well, so there's a couple options and that's not of course something we have to decide right now, but there are a couple options. So one is the city, you know, proactively enforces it, collects data, people can complain to the city and we try to enforce it. That obviously is a, you know, financial commitment from the city. We could pass on that cost to park owners in the form of a fee, but state law says that when we charge park owners a fee, they're entitled to pass on half of it to their residents automatically. So, you know, there's a question of whether you want to do that or not. The other option is it's sort of self-enforced, and really by self-enforced means it's, you know, they'll seek help from legal aid if they think they're being overcharged, or it becomes a defense in an eviction proceeding. So you see it that way, where we're not really proactively enforcing it very much.
And Lisa, your current staff's experience with how these adjustments are made is the city, again, picking, you know, what's the date for the establishment of the base rent and what CPI index we're using. Staff will send out a notice to each of the park owners with, you know, what the CPI was, what's the allowable rate increase. And we could include in the ordinance a requirement that they post that for all the residents to see, so that we're requiring the park owner to provide some transparency around, you know, what is the allowable CPI this year, or what is the CPI, what's the post CPI, and what is the allowable rate increase under the current ordinance. So at least it gives the residents a better understanding of, you know, here's what the actual numbers are. Now, we won't know each person's rent. They'll have to calculate that themselves unless we know that we have their rent registry, but that would be a notification tool that staff could provide to each of the park owners and require that it be shared with residents. So just getting back to the limited vacancy control, the cities that do have it in place, they offer, they limit rent increases between 5 and 15%. Is there general support for that range? Because that's something we could bring forward. There's some additional options when we go to council with this. The recommendation is to establish limited vacancy control, and then what's that percentage? And we can, if you're comfortable, between 5 and 15.
yeah, we can word it like that, or give it 10 because it's right in the middle and let everyone negotiate.
Well, we're gonna get 3 other inputs as well, so, you know, I think, I disagree, I think a range is better.
Okay, perfect. I'm
Okay.
good with you.
Because if it's a 10%, they may not even question it.
And just to clarify, this limit, that range 5 to 15%, that would apply for vacancies that happen for in-place transfers, or for in-place transfers, are we saying no increase at all? And the 5 to 15 is what you can increase it when it's a blank, a blank pad and there's no mobile home there.
I personally think it's the blank pad.
Okay.
I think the in-place transfers, there shouldn't be an increase. Gus, what would you say on that?
No, I have to agree with you on that.
Okay, that's perfect. Just want to make sure I understood. the picture.
Negotiated when you take it to council. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, so if you're going to do a vacancy, a limit on a vacant pad, then you're probably gonna need to do some kind of a rent registration, because otherwise, there'd be no way of knowing how the new tenant, how the prices are increased. Whereas if you just have a flat, if you have a flat amount, then it makes it somewhat easier.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and it's gonna be a nightmare for us to keep track of things,
Yes.
you know. I like David's idea about posting it, make sure they post it in their community.
Yeah.
Bulletin board, I don't know how we catch everything.
And we don't necessarily, like, in this situation of a sale of when I don't know, when someone's selling their unit, for example, like, they'll know what's being offered to the new tenant, and so the seller can, in a little bit way, like, police it. They'll have eyes on the ground too, because they'll know, oh, the park is telling my prospective buyer they're gonna raise the rent by 40%. So
That wouldn't apply to a vacant.
no, that's correct.
And I think a lot of the problems that you were indicating, I think that'll get resolved in how the review process works, which is the next session. Because generally speaking, I work in rent control in San Francisco, and generally speaking, it all got done through the petition process. The landlord goes to raise the rent, it's more than 3%, the tenant files a petition.
Right.
Says that's too much, and then the landlord is the one who has to come forward and bring all the documentation to show not only that it's appropriate, but that there's financial backing.
It polices itself.
Exactly.
So how do you educate the tenant to know his rights?
Well, I think David has a good point of saying that the CPI needs to be posted. And the other thing that you can do, which San Francisco rent ordinance provides for, is that whenever you give a rent increase, you give an indication on that the notice needs to include certain things, like A, what the CPI is, and maybe B, that information regarding this would be available from the county source. I know that the Sonoma County Community Development Commission, they do a lot of tenants' rights work, and that's just information source for tenants who get the notice to turn to say, geez, it's legit.
And that's part of the reason I mentioned that these ordinances are long, is because they often will include, like, here's the text of the notice you need to provide your tenants every time you want to increase the rent by more than 3%. And that notice will say, like, you have the right to do X, Y, and Z, tenant, if you object to this. So they get all that information, and the rent increase is void if you don't provide them that notice. So that segues into the next issue, which is, we talked about how I mentioned property owners have the right to request a higher increase and go through a process to sort of say they deserve that. And most cities in Sonoma County use a process through the Community Development Commission, whereby there's sort of an initial meeting where maybe the landlord has an opportunity to explain why they need the increase. Maybe they're proposing an improvement or something. And then the mobile home owners have an opportunity to sort of object and submit a petition objecting. And so if a certain number sign a petition saying, we object to this amount, it would go to, the way most of these do it, is arbitration before an arbitrator that's appointed by the county's director of Community Development Commission. And that arbitration is binding, and that arbitrator would look at the books, would look at, have service levels decreased in the park, you used to have, I don't know, you used to have a pool and really well-maintained roads, and the property owner hasn't done anything in 5 years, but is still collecting all that, would look at all of that and figure out whether they're obtaining a fair return or not. So that's one option. Something you don't see in Sonoma County very often, but is pretty common elsewhere, is just that the city manager will appoint a hearing officer to hear that arbitration. And there are a number of people who do that sort of work on a one-off basis. And the last option you see in big cities is that there's sometimes a board of appointed folks that do this, or, I think the city of Berkeley has an elected board. Would strongly recommend against that, just because for the most part, a lay appointee, they're not going to be a CPA or an expert, and like, you really need an expert. So you end up having to hire an expert to help them anyway, and it's just a little bit of a mess. So what if the committee's direction is to go with the county commission, we can also reach out to the county to find out, what agreement they'd want us to sign, and those the costs of that sort of thing.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, and here we go again, we're incurring expenses that we're gonna burden the landlord with. He in turn is gonna pass half of that down to the tenants. So it's kind of like, what are we accomplishing sometimes, you have to kind of wonder. To police it, it's costing the tenant more. Just.
Yeah. Well, and they, have some of these work is they can pass on the costs, if they're successful, they can pass on the application fee. There might be an application fee that gets rolled in, but that still might be spread out over, a 5-year period or something. They recover their costs rather than all at once.
Anyone else?
Mayor, I just, from the city manager's perspective, I would certainly recommend you consider a neutral entity like the Sonoma County Community Development Commission.
You don't want to do it? Sure.
I mean, maybe you could build into the ordinance that if, some flexibility, because I know sometimes it may be challenging for the Community Development Commission to set that in process, that the city manager would have that authority if the commission cannot or is unable to provide those services, just as a backup. But I think the Community Development Commission is pretty well prepared to handle these types of these type of arbitration processes, and has the necessary access to the professional attorneys and arbitrators that they will be able to best address these types of concerns should they come up.
I mean, the one thing is, it is in Santa Rosa, so people would have to go down there for the hearing, which could be a challenge for some people. But we did reach out to the CDC knowing this was coming, and actually I haven't heard back, so we'll just make sure that they're willing to take us on. When I worked in Windsor, we had that, and we had a few hearings, and they basically, the new owner of a park came in and said, hey, we've neglected these pipes for years and years, I have to put these in, here's the cost, and they did a thorough hearing, and they looked at the books and justified it, and it seemed to be a pretty good process that they really have, they're set up for it, so.
And in a situation like Kevin just mentioned, where it's, hey, we did a capital repair or something like that, normally, and we could specify this in the ordinance, it's not like they're gonna say recover all $100,000 this year, raise the rents by $300 this year to get it. Usually what we would specify in the ordinance is like it gets amortized with interest over a period of time, so that the rent per month are going up by a much smaller amount, but the owner is made whole.
Go ahead.
Alex, I have a question with regards to like a capital improvement. Does it provide for that when that capital improvement cost has been recuperated, you revert back to the base rent.
Yeah, that's so
Like rent control.
yeah.
Or,
And that would be in the arbitrator's decision of, you can increase the rent by $8 a month for, 4 years or whatever, and then it would revert back. And, throughout that 8-year period, they'd be able to continue increasing their rents too by the 3% of the normal amount. But
My next question, listening to Kevin talking, thinking about Santa Rosa, is this something that we might want to pass on to our code enforcement, since he's an attorney, and add it and into our budget, and we figure that amount out when necessary? I don't know. I'm throwing out to you guys, and I want to hear from you in a second about that one, after I hear from Kevin or David, thoughts. Or Alex.
yeah, so I represent some other cities that use hearing officers, and we could get their, I could find out what their rates are. I would not recommend using our code enforcement one, because he may have the sort of math skills to do this, but even if he did, you want a hearing officer that's neutral and someone who's sort of permanently under contract from the city. It could be seen as he has incentive to keep the city happy because he wants that code enforcement work to continue. And so it's better to say, hey, we have this pool of 5 people and we pick one at random to do the hearing.
Well, then to me, the CDC is definitely the best answer.
Yeah.
Well, I like David's idea of having the option in case in case the CDC said we're too busy or whatever it is.
And when it goes to council, we hopefully can have some more financial information about who would charge what, just so you can get a sense of that. And then I'm sorry.
The only public left, anything else on that?
well, I have three comments, and one of them pertains to that and 2 pertain to other things. What I have found with regards to the process, which is you have this meet and confer, you get a notice, you meet and confer, and then the tenant files a petition and you go to hearing. What I haven't had personal experience, but what I've heard is that basically the meet and confer doesn't really amount to anything. And given that the inclination is to go to Santa Rosa for the arbitration, what I would suggest is to have a meet and confer right here in City Hall in Cloverdale that's overseen by somebody who brings the 2 parties together to have a serious mediation, if you will, to try and get it settled. The whole idea being we want to try and cut off the litigation, if you will, of a petition and go to arbitration. And just to have somebody that's present that can oversee the process would be very helpful with regards to that.
Well, let's bring it forward with this. The CDC will hopefully have numbers and things like you said, Alex, and we can discuss them more with the full council when we actually vote on it. Thank you. All right, Alex.
Yeah, so the last 2 more things, one that's on here is the determination of base rent. Basically, when's the start date going to be? A normal ordinance, you say goes, 30 days in after adoption, that would be the start date. For rent control, there's sometimes a desire to make it retroactive, because otherwise parks hear about the ordinance and they raise their rents in anticipation of the ordinance. So sometimes it's, they have a back date, maybe we say January 1st. So that way, even if it's not adopted until July 1st, they'd have to roll their rents back to that date, whatever they were charging January 1st. But of course, I defer to the committee on what your thoughts are.
Well, I think it's basically going to depend on how quick we put this together and the rest of the council agrees on it. But I like the idea of rolling it back to a specific finite time, as opposed to giving him 6 months to raise his rents through the roof. So I don't know how we establish that, but whether it's the beginning of a quarter, or the beginning of July, however we decide to do it. But I think it should be a date and time.
Okay.
Anyone else on that? No? I like the beginning of the year personally. It's an easy date. It's either fiscal year or calendar, and we're right at the calendar. So I would say we started with that one.
Okay.
We're only retroactive for a month right now if we push this through in our next meeting. What do you want to comment? Yes,
Well, I was just gonna say, assuming that the landlord hasn't raised his prices considerably
Right.
between the first of the year and when it's finally adopted. But that's a date that can be changed, you know,
Yeah.
but
And then the last thing, well, one thing to get feedback on, one just to let you guys know, is are there any exemptions you'd like? And the specific exemption I have in mind is state law used to require cities to exempt people with long-term leases. So, you know, a tenant might sign a lease that says, here's my you know, my agreement with you, I'll let my rent be increased by 3% a year. Or, you know, 2.5% a year, let's say, and no matter what, you can raise it by 2%, 2.5% a year for 4 years. So in some years that might be more than what 75% of CPI is, but because they have a long-term relationship, they're allowed to do that. That's an exemption that some cities have. It's not mandatory, but it's something you could consider. It gives the tenant a little more certainty of exactly what the rent increase will be. But in some years, it might be a little higher or a little lower than what their rent increase would otherwise be.
Yes.
well, Alex, I guess the question I would have on that particular scenario is, which would supersede? So let's say there's 2 or 3 of those agreements out there now between the tenant and the park owner. Those fold away. Could a new tenant actually go in and negotiate an agreement like that?
If
Or would this-
we'd have to allow them to under our ordinance, otherwise our ordinance would control the 3% or 75%. But you know, frankly, I think with 3% is a pretty low number. I don't know that there's as much incentive on either side for those. I think when you were dealing with a higher number, maybe a 5% cap, there's more incentive for a tenant to say, well, if you guarantee my rate's only going to be 3.5%, you know, I'll agree to that long term because I never want to pay 5%, even though I know in some years inflation may only be 2.5%. They want that security. With a 3% cap, I don't know that there's that much incentive for anyone to do these
Could
types
it
of.
have some type of wording that said they can negotiate their own long-term lease for a lower percentage only? Because if supply and demand came in, what if somebody decided to come in and 2 people were buying with the same trailer that they have now, and somebody came in and said, well, I'll sign a long-term lease for 5%.
Yeah.
And you're getting bought out of a trailer park.
Yeah,
I mean,
we could
stop
include
that.
that. Yeah, we could include that. I imagine though in that situation, a park owner doesn't want to sign it because they know that's just worse than no agreement, from their perspective. But I mean, maybe the guaranteed rent, I don't know, but we could include that sort of language.
That's here and there to me.
Yeah,
So
or we could just not include it at all and see if it's an issue that sometimes you can hear from the community. Maybe they'll express this as something we want.
tackle that one when someone brings it to us.
Yeah, and then just not seeking direction right now, but just so you know, David mentioned this earlier about land use controls. You know, the possibility of an overlay district, for example, which would say, you know, a mobile home park is the only thing you can use this property for, which discourages park owners from sort of tearing down the park and you know, building housing or something else there. That's something we'll seek direction from the city council on, but on a separate track, because that's something that go into the zoning code. We have to go to the planning commission, would take a little bit more time. So we've thought of that as do the rent control ordinance first, and then on a separate track, if the council provides the direction, we'll do this other aspect. So with that, I think we've received all the direction on the specific issues we wanted. And then the question for the committee is, do you want the full ordinance with these details in it to come back to you, or just go straight to the council? If it goes to the council, we would be advertising that to the park residents and owners as a time for them to come give comment and consider it, so that it's not a surprise to anyone.
Well, is there a way for it to come back to this, subcommittee? If staff agrees and let the park owners know that it's going to be discussed?
We certainly can. The one thing we were a little hesitant about that is, if you get a bunch of people from the parks coming, you're in a small room right now, you can't really accommodate, even 15 residents showing up. And so I think we probably wouldn't, and it's also in the middle of the day, it could be harder for people to come. We could certainly, if the committee wants, let them know that, there will be an opportunity at a city council meeting also.
Okay, so then if you bring it back directly to the city council, it will be well advertised and they can come. It's not final by us at that point. The last thing I want to see us do is try and make a decision right there that night.
Correct.
This is pretty big and council members need a chance to digest it, especially if that's going to be the first time they're going to see it.
Yeah. So every ordinance would requires 2 readings. And so you can't really make substantive changes between the two. So what we would anticipate is that this was really like a 3-meeting process. A first to get direction from the full council, a second where we've taken that direction, changed the text and you introduce it, and then the third where you adopt it. And the adoption might just be on consent without any sort of.
Well, I'm fine with whichever way staff and the mayor wants to go on that. Transparency is the key, so whatever we can do to let the tenants and the landlords know that this is a topic and we need to hear from you, works for me.
I think that, the second this gets out, it'll be a hot button item, so I think it's a good thing. I think that we put it on the agenda for our next council meeting, get it going, and it'll stir the pot real quick, and then so that if people start coming in our second meeting, which should be the end of February. And I think that's where we'll end up hitting our crowd. So I think that we do it, we have a good discussion on, what is it, the 16th? No, when's our next meeting? 14th. On the 14th, we end up having a good discussion and kind of get an idea, and that will stir up everyone. They'll already know, but it'll stir more people to come and speak, because they'll have our ideas at that point as well.
Well, that's pretty fast, don't you think?
I do.
Staff, do you think?
Is it too fast for staff?
I mean, I defer to Alex. I think what I hear you saying there would be, bring this forward as a discussion item, similar to how it was presented today with these options, but with your recommendations.
Correct.
Outline that, based on initial review, we'll walk through these key issues that Alex identified, and these were the recommendations.
Here's what I don't want, is I don't want it to go all the way into April and have us trying to do retroactive to January.
Yeah.
I want to get it done as quickly as possible. And we all know that the first reading really, all it does is stir the pot and get people kind of informed.
So
And go ahead.
yeah, well, Mayor, I can put, just modify the staff report briefly to have this ready to go next week. That's not a problem. I do anticipate that it's probably not feasible I would defer to David to get notices out to all the residents and that. So if that doesn't matter to you, we can always notice the next meeting, or the word of mouth will travel. I just,
Word of mouth can travel with this. I mean, if I'm wrong, I'd love to hear it, but that's one thing our community does pretty well. So I think that the first reading will create that, and then it'll give us time to get the notices out and things to make sure we have a better population on the second meeting. If I gives any idea.
Well, my only concern, and we talk about this as council members quite often, that there's a major issue coming in front of the city council. It's vented at the subcommittee, and the full council doesn't know about it until 2 or 3 days before the city council meeting. So I'd like to get this out to my fellow council members ASAP, because they're going to be getting phone calls from their constituents about what's this new rate, what's this new ordinance that's being passed for trailer parks, and they're not going to know anything about it. So
I think to that point, and given that the agenda is going to go out Thursday, would be modify the memo in the packet with the key points, seeking full council kind of direction on each one of the concurrence. And with that, we'll be broadcasting that, we'll bring back a draft ordinance
Yep.
at the March 28th council meeting, and then that gives us time to do the noticing,
February.
February 20th.
or February 28th, excuse me.
Yeah.
Let's try to buy some time. dude.
Can we send out an email saying that this is before the agenda goes out, that this is coming, please go to the minutes and watch the discussion on this topic. So they can get educated a little bit before they get the packet.
The council?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the subcommittee will be recorded, so we can
Yeah.
certainly share this.
Let them know it's out there now, and next week they're gonna be getting, or the end of this week, they're gonna be getting their agenda.
Yeah.
I just don't want to hear a lot of whining in that, you know, they were blindsided.
You sure you want people to watch the meeting when you tell them they're gonna be whining?
Sorry.
Mayor, again, just to ask the city attorney, Mug, does that timeframe work for
Yeah,
you?
that's certainly fine. We can modify quickly to get it to Mike, I think by Wednesday, so it can get published. That's no problem.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I just have a couple of concerns that are unrelated to anything that we discussed. And
Oh,
one,
wait. Okay, on this item?
yeah, I was one, you may have covered it, Alex, with your any vehicle structure. The way mobile home parks are usually written, mobile homes are exempted. Oftentimes you have other vehicles that occupy the space. And I think Sebastopol has a section that deals with that says, look, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's been there 9 months, you're controlled. And I would encourage the council to adopt something similar to that. I mentioned the idea of a mediator for the third part is changing park ownership. We saw this out of Rockwell last year. Ultimately, new owners come in and they're looking to take advantage of the situation. And I think one thing that should definitely be included is to eliminate the inclusion of debt service from any sort of a pass-through. Bottom line is that new owner comes in, they take out a huge mortgage, they want to pass through the cost of that mortgage to the tenant. So I think that any sort of a debt service that's not related to a capital improvement should not be allowed. And the other thing that I would encourage the council to do is to, and it may again be through this additional land use control, is to limit the availability of a new owner of a mobile park from going out of business, basically. You know, my philosophy is if you don't want to run a mobile home park, don't buy one. But if you're going to buy one, you ought to operate one. It should be like, in rent control for buildings, they say 5 years. If you want to go out of the rental business for 5 years, you can do that. But you can't rent, if you're gonna kick someone out because you're going out of business, you cannot go back into that business for 5 years. And I think some sort of a 5-year limit on conditional use of property following the sale would be appropriate. Those are my 2 things that I'd like to see included in there as well.
I would recommend you bring those up to the whole council so we can make better direction on that, because the 2 of us will bring it to them and it won't come out right.
Well, I really liked those ideas.
Absolutely, I'm not disagreeing, so that's why I'm saying bring it to everyone so that we don't screw them up, because I will.
Especially the debt service.
Yeah,
You know, I think a certain percentage of rent increase should be allowed to go towards debt service, but not the whole thing.
Right.
And if you did that, then that would eliminate an owner going out of business to some extent as well.
Just so the committee knows, that debt service for your mortgage is, at least in the draft ordinance that I put together, is an excluded expense. It's something you can't count as an expense when you're increasing. You know, you're having that, you know, you have higher property taxes presumably than the old owner, and you can count that, but not the debt service for your
That's it.
mortgage.
Okay. Yeah, and I like the idea if it's sitting in the spot for so many months, you're covered for it.
Perfect. Yeah, and I will certainly send something to the full board.
either that or come do a public comment, maybe both, maybe even, so that we can.
Coming to comment on a Wednesday evening can sometimes be problematic. I'll certainly.
You have good ideas and I appreciate it and want to make sure that everyone hears it and that I wouldn't screw it up. At least write it up. Yeah, please. Thank you. All right, we good here? Everything's good. Moving on. Thanks. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Dan.
Going on to Soda Springs Ranch open space funding.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Just a quick background on this. We recently acquired or became the owners of what's referred to as the Lighter Ranch or Soda Ranch Springs property through collaboration with the Sonoma County Agricultural and Open Space District. The Ag and Open Space District purchased the property and transferred the ownership to the city while maintaining a conservation easement. The council did approve of that transaction, including the language in the conservation easement. Since becoming the owners, what didn't come along with it is any costs or any funding associated with the need and desire to establish public access, but also to cover operation and maintenance of the park. I know that was a concern that was expressed by members of the council is, how are we going to cover the long-term maintenance of this property? Well, the Ag and Open Space District has a policy. It's referred to as their IPAOM policy, or Initial Public Access Operation and Maintenance Policy. And what that provides is that the district can provide funding to entities like the city who have become the owner of these open space for the purposes of covering, some of the costs to enable, safe public access and also some of those initial operational and maintenance costs. And what staff has put together is a draft letter that outlines our funding request. And ultimately, we will be bringing this to council to support council authorization to have the mayor sign the letter, which would be directed to the board of directors of the Ag and Open Space, which is also the board of supervisors. The letter outlines the request for funding, and there's really kind of four categories under which we're requesting funding. And I'll just kind of walk through those. So one we know is there's an abundance of old ranch trails up there, and there's the need to actually physically close some of them, repair them, and or restore them. We've been working with the Redwood Trails Alliance, who's under the direction of Ken Wells. We've had a successful working relationship with them on the Porterfield Creek open space to help us develop a map identifying, certain closures of certain roads, but also, kind of some of the, addressing, some of the neighbors' concerns around long-term maintenance. So that's one category. Another is to develop a multi-use trail plan that would become the primary use of the preserve for residents, seeking hiking and walking opportunities. Again, the Redwood Trail Alliance is very adept at developing these types of trail programs, and we've included a cost estimate in the proposal of $79,000 that's reflective of the cost for Redwood Trail Alliance to perform that work. We also know as part of that, there's going to be need to establish some controls relative to some of the existing roads up there, making sure that they're closed off or maintained not as public access, but as as fire trails, particularly some of like the trail around or behind Port Circle. In one of the critical elements that we developed for Porterfield Creek was ensuring that the access points were accessible under the ADA requirements. We've come up with, again, some cost estimates to make improvements to the existing entrance. And we've consulted with our the city engineer on developing, some specific cost estimates for improving access to the park. There's really kind of three components to access that we wanted to discuss with the subcommittee. Is one is we believe that there's an opportunity to build in a connection to Ranch Springs from City Park and be able to utilize some of the existing infrastructure that's present there. Of course, parking being critical, but also access to restrooms. At this time, we're not planning restrooms on or at Ranch Springs, so having those amenities in close proximity to the entrance we view as critical. So our city engineer developed a cost estimate to make an ADA accessible path from City Park to the park entrance. The estimated cost for that work is about $650,000. So that would include sidewalk, doing the necessary survey work, design work, building a crosswalk and accessible pathway, and as well as an ADA accessible parking space, which we believe is probably going to need to be a concrete pad just to ensure that it's compliant. We also received a request from a member of the community to look at improving the entirety of Foothill Boulevard running north of the park. Currently, there's a half section of road improvements that primarily consists of asphalt and a sidewalk that runs along the east side of Foothill Boulevard, but the west side is completely unimproved, so it lacks the other half of the asphalt, lacks curbs, gutters, drainage, and sidewalks, and right now there's no designated access points. The estimated cost for that is based on preliminary engineering costs, is about $545,000. And then there's also consideration of an access point along the portion of Foothill Boulevard that runs north of Vintage Meadows. We believe that there's a tremendous opportunity to utilize that section of Foothill Boulevard for parking, and also access to the park and pedestrian and bicycle connectivity to City Park, then kind of the Vintage Meadows neighborhood, and City Park, and vice versa. So part of that needs a little more design work in terms of is it a really kind of a soft entrance, like stairs and a dirt trail all the way up to kind of a
ADA ramp.
or some kind of maybe it's not ADA compliant, but some kind of ramp where you take folks that enables folks to access from the sidewalk up to the trail section. So we would estimate, kind of looking at what we recently constructed at our dog park, somewhere probably between 100 and 200,000, just depending on the elements that go into that particular access point. So that kind of rounds out the frontage improvements, and then there are some other elements that we were taking into account for again preparing this park for public access. We know that there's going to be a need for some formal infrastructure that would include picnic tables at some of the sites so that folks can go up and have a picnic, the entrance gates and so forth. But in addition to that, more on the operations side, there will be pretty significant costs and staff time to actively maintain the property. We've already dedicated a fair amount of staff time just doing kind of just initial work to ensure the safety of the property. We've included in preserve management $200,000 request to fund part-time staff for a 3-year timeframe. Of about, just about $65,000 a year. So that would be, really almost a half-time position that could be funded. And I think that's a reflection of just, the amount of staff time that's going to be necessary to do a lot of the veg management and other work. We've included funding for doing the necessary environmental documentation. That would be, in compliance with CEQA, along with getting the property corners surveyed, so that we have very clear property boundaries, and the signage and kind of the traditional visitor safety stuff. So, and our estimate included in the packet was $975,000, but that didn't include the engineering costs for the frontage improvements, which again ranged from anywhere from a low of 200 for foothill only, up to looking at the 2 options for the Second Street / Foothill Boulevard access point. We also realized that the policy that was adopted by the board of directors puts some limitation on the amount we can ask for, but we're prepared to bring this forward for council support, and want to get the committee's feedback on if you feel this is ready to bring forward kind of with us to finalize the cost estimates, what you'd want us to include or not include, and then ultimately if there's anything we're missing, make sure we reflect that in our request from the county.
Gus?
Oh, okay, thank you. With respect to the ADA access from the parking lot at Second Street Park up to the new entrance, do you know how that's going to go? Is that going to go on the south side of Second Street, or is it going to go in front of the residents on Second Street? Because if we tied it in on the south side, that would go a long way with justifying the improvements on that south side with a curb and maybe gutters as well, I would think. And then my other question is, how does it come from Foothill down to Second Street? Is that going to be a walkway down to there and then they go in the park, or are they going to go in here?
Yeah, so, great question, Councilmember Walter. We were really looking at making improvements to the north side of Second Street, with kind of from the perspective that if folks were driving and they parked on the north side of Second, they could then take the sidewalk due west to, via a crosswalk, to an accessible entrance into the park from that location. We didn't really consider the south side. I think that the property there is owned by the Zanzis. We certainly in the future will, with future development, would require those improvements there. But that is, we could improve that side too, but our focus was really kind of
On the other side.
on the city park side.
Gotcha. Okay.
Building that connection in. With respect to North Foothill Boulevard, the request was to kind of view the open space like it was subject to the city's development requirements and have those improvements all along that entirety. Just one concern that I had with that is that we haven't conducted the outreach with the neighbors yet, and got their feedback in terms of, what obviously they're going to be impacted no matter what we do in terms of interest, but whether that's something that the neighbors would support or not. We don't know at this point if they would. Our general feeling is that, based on initial feedback, is that they would probably express some concerns about the full improvement of that section of Foothill Boulevard. And, it starts to, I think to a certain extent, maybe deviate from what the county's policy is around initial preserve, operation and maintenance. But you certainly can make a nexus there that that's important for parking and
Right.
being able to walk along that section of Foothill. But it is undersized and absent improvements there, I think we would want to try to minimize additional parking along that section of the park, really focusing on, the main access. In addition to 88, we could put some additional spaces in there under our easement. I think we were allowed 6, so we could put, like 4 like gravel spaces and 2 ADA. But then, really kind of leveraging that connection to City Park because of the restrooms, the water fountain,
Right.
and then having that path where you have those homes. Again, our view, we haven't asked the neighbors, and to a certain extent, we believe it could add value by having a
New sidewalk.
new sidewalk.
Yeah.
And where the curb cuts are.
Yeah.
Where if you extend it in Foothill, we really have to think about where are the curb, where do we want curb cuts? Where are those curb cuts? Where are the drains, inlets? And it just gets a little more complicated, from a kind of, design perspective, because we would be making some assumptions about, what do we want in the future?
Well, I think the other important thing too, and I know it'll come with the design, is, emergency access. Coming down Second Street, trying to get up to the top of the hill, back into the trails, to get somebody out. I know the chief has his squad, and I'm sure they're gonna be using that up there as well. So we just wanna make sure that we leave plenty of room for them.
Which in my opinion, and I know I'm not the neighbors, and I'd like to hear from more as well, is why we should not be finishing the other side of Foothill, because that will cause people to want to park there. And it's gonna create a traffic jam and issues, and people pulling into the neighbors' driveways, trying to turn around. And all of these things going on down there, because there is no hammerhead, there is no turnaround at the end of that dead end. And so it's just gonna create more problems for us and then for the chief, more complaints coming in, more pissed off neighbors.
So you're basically saying that, they shouldn't object to Foothill being finished,
I'm saying that
because it's gonna give them an out when they get up there?
I would think that the Foothill section was presented to David by a neighbor.
Yeah.
I think that we should ask the rest of the neighbors what they think, because I don't think that we should be finishing that. Because if we do, you're going to be creating spaces for people to park and be gathering there versus parking at the city park and in our 4 designated spots.
Right, because, for instance, and certainly we could put in a sidewalk and still put no parking signs in.
But they're going to.
But what we could do in lieu of putting a lot of money into those types of frontage improvements, put no parking in that location, and so that it would put it's an additional enforcement burden, but it's a lot easier to just put signs in. Because it's not conducive to parking, or if you make all the improvements.
And if all the neighbors were on board, I'm not against it. I mean, it would be cost effective for us. It'd be smart to have someone else paying for us to finish the street. However, I just don't think it's worth it, because I think you'll end up, maybe we survey them, maybe we put this up to those neighbors and say, what do you think? When the time comes to do this, it doesn't hurt to ask, but have it as an option on the paperwork, I think, so that it's separate from everything else that we're asking for, and they can see that it's an added option. That's my idea on it, on that one item, on just Foothill. What do you think on that, Gus?
I think we ought to throw it all in there together and get it one final approval. And then if we decide not to do it, give them the money back, it's.
So,
I think we don't really know what their tolerance is for us asking for stuff. I think
here's my worry, is if we ask for this to throw out $1 million, and that Foothill is included on that, and they say, okay, we're gonna give you 100,000. Are we still going to be on the hook? Okay, and that's what I wanted to know.
Yes.
Now we just say, fine, that's something we don't do. That's the first
we're up
thing
to
to go.
900 something without the Foothill.
And I don't think the county's afraid of it with the amount of money they have in their budget. I really don't. I don't want to cause us more problems in the long run, or lose money because we had to spend money on the street versus spending it on a park.
It's a tough one, and someone keeps bringing this into us, Gus, some does work with the open space district
Is
and
that Dave?
Yeah.
Oh,
he's got some kind of, thought that, you know, they should be treated like developers, and maybe they should, I don't know, but it's,
Yeah, like I said, I'm not against it, I just don't want to take away from the park,
yeah.
with the money that we get.
no,
So
no,
if it's something you think that we could absolutely say, fine, Foothill's first thing to go,
yeah.
then I'm on board with whatever.
Okay, well, we'll do something like that. This is coming to council next week unless you guys wanna bring it back here or something.
No, it's up to the mayor.
I say get as high as you can and bring it to us and we see what we can do.
But I'm a little, disappointed that we didn't have the meeting with the residents there. Because here we are, we're laying this out to the full city council, and we haven't even told them what gotten there before. You know, now granted, there's only 8 or 9 homes there, but we've already committed to them that we were gonna do that.
No, you're right, and we have to schedule that. I mean, this is gonna be. Yeah. Preliminary list, I mean,
Well, is there any way that we could get them copies of the agenda report that we're gonna do?
yeah, absolutely.
And let them hand deliver it and let them know, here's what we're planning, but it's just discussion at this point. Nothing's actually in stone.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to hear them.
No, I hear you. I agree with that.
So if that is, I agree with you on this, if needed, I'll go
And
handle it, I don't care.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you guys are too tight on staff, I'll go knock on the doors one night and take care of it.
David, I was just saying, you know, I'm a little disappointed that, you know, we're gonna be presenting this to this full city council and we hadn't had an opportunity to talk with the residents in that area. So my suggestion to Kevin, and I'm not sure whether we can do it or not, can we get the agenda packet, just this particular section, and hand deliver it to them and let them know that this is going in front of the city council, but discussion only, please come to the meeting. Because we did kind of commit to them that we would select their input prior to, anything being finalized.
Yeah, and, you know, at this point, it's by no means is it final, it's, you know, just our request for funding. But we want it obviously to be reflective of what we plan to do there and what, you know, what the council supports, so we can.
That's when the Foothill thing's gonna blow up. I think. I mean. But
Okay.
If you give me the agenda report and you don't have one to go, I'll make sure the neighbors get copies so that they can come to the meeting on.
I'm trying to think how many we need back there.
we do have a few folks who have emailed, so we can trust those off.
There's at least 10, because I think you have 6 on Parkside, and then you have 2 or 3 on Finished Meadows side.
And we want Zancy to be part of that.
Do we really? Just
Yeah.
kidding. Sorry, Pedro.
We want Zancy because their property touches that. They're affected, you know, even though their house is over on.
Yeah, it's on Second Street.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that make sense, David?
Mhm.
You think we can do that?
We can, we'll, I mean, with your direction, we'll certainly, give it a try to, you know, we're not hiding anything. It's, and again, this is just the initial request, so, part of the funding was to actually do some of that
Right.
outreach and, you know, workshop, but we can, let them know that, you know, this is coming forward as a discussion item.
And then
And it'd be nice to hand some.
I'll follow up on that and take care of that one.
Yeah,
personally.
I mean, just the documentation we have here, it kind of gives a pretty good perspective on, you know, some of the mapping, because including the packet were some proposed concepts for the trail system up there. It identifies you know, which existing ranch roads we propose to be closed off for trail purposes, but maybe maintained as fire access. We know we have, you know, other roads that just lead to adjacent properties where we don't currently have access. So it also gives the community a perspective on, you know, what we're currently planning.
Well, that's good, but quite frankly, they only care about their front yard.
Well, the trail that goes closest to, one of those houses, with the pool.
Yeah, Port Circle.
Port Circle,
Uh-huh.
that one that's immediately adjacent to theirs where you can see in is proposed to be closed.
No.
and only for fire use.
And I'm going to send that to those homeowners right now or tonight, since I have copies of that.
They
Is
should,
that Divines?
It's going to be the axles and, oh, Richard, I remember his name. Yeah, there's.
Joe Divine and Karen Divine?
Yes,
Hey there.
Joe, that's the Corvette Joe.
Exactly, yeah, that's it.
Yes, I'm going to make sure they get copies and that the access are so the two main ones that touch. Perfect. Yeah, thanks. And
Yeah.
I'm just pictures of the maps that we have here and say, look at. they're
they should
taking
be
the
happy
trail
about
away.
that.
This is what we have, this is our proposed, yeah.
They're gonna be happy about that, but the parking, on Foothill and like,
Yeah, and,
Well, it's around the corner.
yeah, it is.
and we want to, differentiate, in terms of, one, this is our ask for funding.
Right.
And I hope all the residents agree, we want to maximize our funding. And then, the real planning work will come later. It just, we had to start somewhere. And so, we had to do a little bit of we had to do our homework on the trails and the connectivity to be able to come up with this, initial ask. And there's nothing preventing us from coming back later with a different request or modifying it, but, I think we wanted to, make our request, as solid as possible, because I know there's a lot of interest in bringing this park, online.
There was just one little correction in the memo from the mayor, so I showed Kevin and, yeah, I got you. Thank you.
Yeah, those are all drafts, so.
All right, we'll move on to standing items unless we have anything else.
Oh, we have one more, new business item. This is the
Oh, sorry.
proclamation policy.
Yep.
So this item went before, council, for discussion, and at the time, staff was also requesting, council consideration of a resolution that would memorialize a process for, proclamations, which included, approving a list of existing proclamations, giving us feedback on, potentially new ones for bringing forward on an annual basis, but also memorializing the proclamation request form. And we've since received, our city clerk has since received a couple of requests for proclamations, and so Mike, can you are you there? Can you respond to Councilmember Walter's request, who we received proclamation requests from?
Yeah, so we've received one from Andy Whiphone with the Red Cross. And another one from Gina Fortino Dixon with Women's History Month. And they're part of I'm looking at their emails, the Commission of Human Rights. Looks like we've done both of their resos in the past, but again, since this item is before you, it's one of those ones we'd want to get approval of prior, or depending on the direction of the subcommittee today. I just didn't want to give them approval without this, since it is agenda.
So this is no different than what in past years the process was. They contact us and say, we want to do a proclamation.
Well, the difference of at least what staff's recommendation was a few weeks back at the council meeting, was that we'd have a form that they submit. It's not just an email saying like, hey, can we have this or that? It's an actual form that requires the language they want. It asks what date they want it, who's going to represent it. It's basically so we can get information from them, and it's not just it's to save some time for David and I and Kevin to not just writing the resos, but finding out who's going to represent that group, or who, information like that.
No, I was under the impression that we were getting them from the community at large as opposed to the service organization. So, okay.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
what we've done is included in the packet a matrix that includes current proclamations based on how they've been brought forward in the past. So we call them reoccurring, along with identifying some potential proclamations for consideration. we've, assigned those to, a particular month, of the year. And kind of going on the basis that, no more than 3 proclamations per meeting. We made every attempt to kind of break it out so that, in no one meeting, there's more than 3 proclamations. We did not identify the non-date specific, like certificates of appreciation or recognition. So for example, if we have a local service group that performs a project, those are just gonna come up on a more or less kind of as a one-off basis, so they're not necessarily reoccurring. And those can be set, those dates can be set by council. But what we're kind of envisioning is that council, maybe every year, when you're reviewing subcommittee and regional board assignments, that you also review the list of flags, but also review the list of proclamations. So you approve your list in advance, and therefore we know going forward what the schedule of proclamations are for the year. But that's where the form comes in. So if you're on the list, you're good. But if, as we do throughout the year, we get a new request, we were envisioning a process where we request, or the requesting party would submit a form that kind of, outlines again, what's the proclamation title, a brief description, what verbiage they'd like us to use, who's accepting it, the title of that person.
Yeah.
And that come before the subcommittee, Finance Admin and Police Subcommittee for approval, and that this subcommittee would be the approving body for future proclamation requests. Again, that's something that we're seeking your input. One is on the list of existing proclamations, as well as potential new, but also this request form, and whether the subcommittee agrees with the process that we've set forth. We believe this is a good process. Other cities, which include the packet, for example, City of Sonoma has specific guidelines. So we kind of took into account some of their language. But a number of other cities, while they may not have formal guidelines, they do have, every year they approve a list of proclamations. So that way it's kind of known in advance and planned for based on the forward calendar of city council meetings. And there's some certainty, and if there's any objection early in the year to any particular issue or proclamation, council would have the opportunity to look at the list and say, oh, I don't like this one this year, or whatever, or this year we really want to recognize some 10th anniversary or some special event.
Well,
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't disagree. I think that form is, I like it the old way, at the discretion of the mayor. But so be it. That I think this form would help staff immensely, and Mike for getting the proclamations ready. But what I was hearing from the council was they want to, not so much the standard ones, because I don't think anybody's going to argue with the Red Cross getting one, or the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts, but they're concerned about the ones that pop up. For example, the letter that we sent in reference to the conflict in Israel and the Middle East right now. That's what they want to be able to get their hands on prior to it coming to the dais for reading. So how do we handle those? Like, I don't know who sent that request in for conflict in the Middle East, and peace and all, but how did that get to the city council?
Yeah, so that request came in via email to both myself and the mayor. And we review it and discuss it, and based on the request, we brought it forward.
Sure.
And so that's been kind of the past practice.
Right.
And I think that's where we heard from members of council that that's when they'd like to weigh in on.
Yeah.
And I think that's why with the process we're recommending, you at least it would come to subcommittee. We're trying to be very transparent with our subcommittee agendas that, by way of the city council meeting, by way of sending them out, that, if a council member objects to one, they would give them an opportunity to at least, maybe, share their perspective.
How would they do that if they're not on this committee?
Well, I think that would be something we'd want to talk about. What's that process like?
Okay, well, here's what I think, and it's only my 2 cents. The subcommittee gets a request because that email, we would have contacted that individual, said, fill out this form and return it to us. Then it comes to this subcommittee, and at that point in time, if the subcommittee says, yeah, then that's not gonna work neither, because we may decide we don't want it, and there's 3 others that decide they want it. What I think is when we get a request from an organization to do a proclamation, an email needs to go out, do not respond. We received a request from so-and-so, an organization that does X, Y, and Z. They want to be recognized. And if you have any concerns, please get back to me. I don't know how else to do it, if everybody wants to touch it.
Yeah, the only hard part about email would be that, it's the Brown Act with serial meetings. We can't be polling you basically. So we'd have,
Well, Mike, that's why I hope they would respond to all,
Right.
It would be a separate respond to you or to David, whatever the email says, and only if they have an objection. I don't know how else to do it and keep them happy.
So
Yeah.
here was my thought process, and you can tell me what you think of it, is as we gather these people who requested a proclamation, it's for the following year. So once a year, like we do everything else, we choose our positions, we choose now the flags, now we would choose our proclamations, and they are done just that one time. Every year we choose what we want. And besides that, it's up to the mayor to add if he or she chooses.
Well, so then what you're saying is we'd approve them, and then all of a sudden, the Lions Club and everybody does work at the cemetery, and we want to do a
Then that goes through the mayor.
and then the mayor has sole discretion.
Correct.
Well, then, I guess the other council members, too bad if you don't like it.
Well, you just said that that's the way it used to be, that the mayor had the decision making.
Yeah, that was the way it used to be, but apparently there's some council members aren't happy.
Well, that's why I was trying to set, or I shouldn't say I, because I didn't do any of this. It's just always been I. With this, I'm just saying, like, if we set the normal ones that everyone wants, when a random one pops up, then the answer is probably no, unless it's something very local and very positive.
Yeah. I don't care one way or the other. I just know there was one council member that was rather upset about it, and how do we make sure that they have to look at it before we go through all the efforts of putting it together? I don't know. So.
Yeah, and that's the difficult thing, is then we're bringing every one of these to a council to approve before it goes to a proclamation.
Yeah.
I mean, if we follow the process that was, again, we're just providing an alternative for addressing future requests. A council member who might object could, at a council meeting, under agenda review, say, oh, I see a proclamation is for whatever you name the event or the activity is on the agenda, and I just want to voice my opinion that I oppose that or I support that.
So maybe these requests can go out to all of council, and then under their chance to speak, they could actually oppose if they chose to. There was a request, for this proclamation, and I oppose it.
Well, that's why I thought if we just send out a blanket email to all the council members, big bold letters, do not reply to all. Here's a proclamation that's coming down the pipe. Any objections, call David or call Mike. Now, I mean, I don't know.
But just,
Yeah, another email.
yeah, just the ones that you recognize in January are the ones for the year. If it's an ongoing one, then they can get on next
Well,
January.
and that's how I feel about it, is anything ongoing, it needs to be recognized when we choose, and then if it's something, like you said, like, I liked your example for the cemetery with,
Yeah,
you know, I mean, that's something that no one's going to oppose.
You wouldn't think so.
You wouldn't think so.
You wouldn't think so.
And I think that anything that's controversial, I would hope that the mayor or the city manager would say, this is a controversial one, bring it to the council.
Well, maybe we can wordsmith it a little bit too, in the sense that these are proclamations that are approved at the beginning of every year. Throughout the year, we'll have certificates of recognition. You know, we're recognizing the Lions Club for helping, we're recognizing so-and-so. They're not proclamations, you know, and those are the ones that the mayor has authority over, right?
Yeah.
And if it's a national or county issue, you know, then it's, maybe
then-
it comes back to the full city council for
You
discussion.
can, and that also, even when I'm gone, it's still, the mayor's supposed to have that ability to do that, as you know.
I agree.
And so maybe it is the mayor's discretion, and he has to deal with the consequences.
But what do you think about calling them something different?
They have them listed here as proclamations and also certificates of appreciation and recognition, so there's two separate ones, maybe,
Oh, maybe we word them, yeah, maybe word them different.
yeah.
Yeah, and Mayor, if you look at the city of Sonoma's council policy, we just kind of put that in there as a, you know,
Yeah, the
whatever.
last page, I think I saw that.
They've broken it up a little bit as well between requests for recognition versus, you know, proclamations. We can obviously wordsmith the heck out of our own policy if that's the direction that we're interested in, but you can see like, number one is certificates. They have a key to the city, which we don't do, so, but their number three is proclamations, and it kind of explains, just breaks out what the difference is between the two types.
Yeah,
Thought they did a good job, so we decided to include it in the packet, but,
no, I was reading that, I thought they did a good job, like you talked about the key to the city, different things that they do. We don't.
right. And we would obviously tailor make one of these to our own, but I know that, or at least my office and the city clerk's office wants the direction just of what we want to do. That's why it's coming forward.
And in the policy, using Sonoma as an example, they of course require much of the information that the form that Mike developed, requests, but what they stated here in terms of an approval process is it shall be sent to the city clerk, or city hall, on the requested document. The request will be administered by the offices of the city manager and the city clerk and must be approved by the mayor or designee. So I guess again, we sometimes these proclamations, we get different requests, and part of what we're trying to do is just have some kind of policy just to guide us.
I mean, just about every proclamation we give says, you know, maybe that last sentence has to be revised too. You know, now here, before be it resolved, I, Todd Lands, Mayor of the City of Cloverdale, and my fellow council members, maybe we leave that fellow council members off.
I think it's smart because you're putting the onus on one person.
Yeah.
And that's the purpose of this, a mayor's spot is to be the one that does that.
I don't know,
So and that's in regards to the certification, the
No proclamation at the end.
we're saying that for all proclamations?
no, I'm just throwing that out there.
No, ones that go directly through the mayor, I think it should do that. I mean, the
Right.
ones we choose on, if we do that where we're choosing them on a yearly basis, I think those go through the full council. But the ones that would be chosen, spur of the moment are through the mayor.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that.
Is the list that we created, this one right here, this monthly list? Is there any thing that you want to discuss regarding any of these, or does this list look good as is?
I only had a question on two of them. And it was only because it seemed kind of repetitive, and so because I don't know enough. April has Week of the Young Child, October has Child Environmental Health Day. Is that something that's drastically different because I don't know the answer, that we have to have both.
Yeah, if I was to default, I'd probably, recommend week of the young child, that's the council's approved flying of the flag, is to kind of bring attention to violence against children.
So then the Children's Environmental Health Day,
It's more about health.
we already have now we have a bike to work day one. I mean, I think that we could do away with some of these days, because those aren't proclamation worthy, in my opinion. Bike to work day is great for us to support, but do we need to read and do a proclamation every year on it? What do you think on that, Vince? I mean, proclamation should be something special to me. It's like really not something that happens every year, no matter what.
I agree with you, and that's why I think distinguishing between proclamation and certificate of appreciation or certificate of thank you or whatever, that's why we need to separate them a little bit. But no,
Yeah, I mean, one thought would be, bike to work might be something that's optional if there is an event or activity planned. I mean, in the past, we've participated in like a county sponsored bike to work day.
Right.
Worked with the bike shop to do something.
meet in the plaza, have coffee and donuts, and a bike to work.
Yeah, exactly. But we haven't done that every year, so maybe that's like as needed or you know, if there's a particular event that's planned around it versus just doing a proclamation to say, bike to work.
Yeah, so I think that one can go away. Would you agree?
Yeah,
And I think that the Children's Environmental Health Day doesn't need to be there, a full proclamation for that. And then the only other thing I saw, the student liaison recognition is in June. And they're usually graduating and gone by that meeting. So they're usually their last meeting is the last meeting in May.
Okay,
Okay.
we can move that.
I mean, I know they can come back for it, but do they?
Yes.
So.
I was kind of hoping that recognition would kind of shift into more of a, hopefully they could have their paperwork and everything done so we can actually supply them with their check and some of the other, have a little bit more of it, be a little more ceremonious than some of the past ones were just like, all right, well, it's the last meeting, nice seeing you. But we can discuss more of that offline on how we want to do that, but.
I think that'd be great, second meeting in May, and we could, have everything ready and,
Okay.
certificate of appreciation, not a proclamation. I don't know how it's listed on this, but.
Yeah, we put it in there just because we wanted to see which ones we know for sure are gonna happen in specific months.
Yeah,
But it is technically a certificate of recognition, not a proclamation. The other ones, just like the ones listed 1 through 5, 6, those we just don't know when those would happen, they hit or miss.
And I guess, maybe a more immediate question is, February is Black History Month. It is on our list. We previously brought that forward. If you want to go ahead and proceed, we'll put that on the February.
Yeah. Now, I don't know anything about the American Heart Month. This listed as a new one. Is that something that is common, or is that something that, I mean, is that another one that we can not do?
Yeah, no obligation to do it. I don't think we received any requests for that one specifically, Mike. It was just
Look, that's
one a lot of other cities were drawing attention to.
Gus, do you have any
I don't,
on that?
I can.
I try to minimize, and it's nothing against any one of these. It's just I try to minimize proclamations so that they're a little more special, and not.
And that's one of the hard things that we found, because there's a slippery slope with any of them, like there's the different heritage months. You can't, if you get rid of one, you get rid of them all, or you select certain ones based on the percentage of, residents that we have, or, when David and I were looking at this list, we also discussed things, certain days like Cesar Chavez Day is a nationally recognized holiday now. It's a federal holiday. Do we proclaim it? Do we not? Most cities are, so we left it on. But you could say the same with Juneteenth now, because it's a federally recognized holiday. There's a few of these, there are awareness months versus specific events. It's just really wanted your direction on where do we draw the line, so we can kind of write up a policy. that can help us
Here,
dictate.
maybe eliminate American Heart Month, move bike to work down day, it kind of, if it's a special event. And
Children's Environmental Health Day.
remove child's environmental health day.
And then the other one that what is Arbor Week? Is that normally nationally recognized? Is that something that, I mean, because we already have things for our Public Works Week and things like that. Do we need any?
I think we looked at that originally as kind of a consistency thing, so we're recognizing almost every department. Right now, we do have Parks Makes Life Better in July, which we thought would be good for recreation and parks. Arbor Week, pulling it up right here to see the history of it, but
It's more about just celebrating planting a tree. Usually it's done early in March because you don't really want to plant a tree much later than that.
I mean, we're already celebrating creeks and parks and things along those lines. Do we need that one?
No, I don't think so. I think all the yellow ones are again optional. We kind of supported the Water Awareness Month. Well, then it's a good one to draw attention to.
If they're optional,
Yeah.
then let's just leave them there, and then it's at the option of the mayor whether he wants to do that or not.
Yeah, so, yeah, what he did is that the ones that aren't in yellow are the ones we do currently.
Yeah.
And the other ones are what they were suggesting. So,
Which they were suggesting.
Michael and David
Oh.
brought those.
Well, yeah,
we went through and looked at quite a few other cities within Sonoma County and just kind of threw them on the list. Most of them, the ones that are highlighted are ones that other cities pretty much all participate in. So it's just whether we want to or not. And you'll look, if you look at any of the proclamation lists, even like the one that's on Sonoma as the example, it's very, they do different ones than we do, but it's up to council discussion. But for example, this is what they selected as their annual proclamation list. These ones are going to happen no matter what. Any new ones will go through this request form, which is basically what the similar form to what I created.
is the full city council going to approve this list?
They would be approving this list however you recommend it.
Well, this is just far too complicated. I think it's something that it wasn't broken. We're trying to fix it, and because if we present this list to the full city council, they don't want to know what every one of those ones in the yellow is all about. And it'll be such a long meeting trying to decide what's this one and
Do we remove all the yellow, approve the list as
submit it.
and submit it?
I moved.
So remove all the yellow, remove the couple that we talked about that are in white, bring it to us to submit, and then come January, if anyone wants to add to it, they can add to it for the following year. How's that, Mike?
Mayor, my amendment to your request would be just Water Awareness Month. That would be the only one.
Okay.
I think in water awareness and maybe the Parks Make Life Better because we're really trying to push for recreation.
I agree. I like the parks one as well, but leave the parks one as well.
Okay.
Okay, so water awareness month, Parks Make Life Better, all the other ones.
All the others can go, your Children's Environmental Health Day can go. And
We did put National Preparedness Month just as it's another chance to reiterate Clover Ready and whatnot in this fall, but again, we can always do that through other means.
the American, yeah, that's good. Okay. Yep. All right. Decision made.
And I guess the question, do you, I mean, we'll have the list. We wanna,
Sure.
make sure that our members of council support it with this kind of left. Do we bring it forward to adopt for this year? And again, we wanted to just make sure that there's consensus on the process. I think what we're hearing is the process would be council adopts the list of proclamations, the first or second meeting in January. Any new proclamations would be approved, would be required to be submitted on the form. will be approved by the mayor. Or by the city mayor in consultation with the mayor.
By the mayor or brought forward the following January for approval.
Yeah.
Because, oh, go ahead.
The question's gonna come up, well, that didn't really satisfy my concern. You know, these I'm fine with, but how about the new ones that are coming in that I'm not fine with? And then I think at that point, it's, you know, it's a resolution signed by the mayor, not the full city council, and it's his okay to recognize that.
And that's going to happen.
That's a role of the mayor
Yeah.
is to decide.
Is to decide that. And if he starts doing the Ku Klux Klan or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, then we restructure the organization.
Exactly, then there's a new vote that comes down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess between the city clerk and I, we can work together, just if we want to try to, if this committee supports, just bring something that gives us some specific, you know, good direction that we can use so that, you know, when there are issues, we have something to point to.
Yeah, if there's something, if we talk to the mayor and give a council member a call.
So for the upcoming meeting that, well, not this next meeting, but the one after, most likely, for us to get all this together. Direction wise, are we writing a policy at this point to capture all that direction, or do we wait until council gives the decision, we can make something up after that? Like,
I don't think there's any hurry to write a policy, to be honest with you, because I got a feeling it's gonna change anyhow. I would just, you know, do some type of a staff report that these are the proclamations we want to recognize for this year. I don't know, what do you think?
No, we already have that list, and the list is not highlighted as ours. And it's approved by the mayor, so I say you just bring it forward the way it is, how we just discussed it. There's nothing different, we're not doing any changes to what we already do, other than what the mayor is, telling you to do. So I think that we leave it the way it is, and come January, if there's still a lot of fuss, then we make the policy, you have everything in place. And we bring it up together at that point, and we're reintroducing anything new that people want to bring. I don't think that I think that we had one policy that rubbed someone the wrong way, or one proclamation, I apologize.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to be more cognizant of what we're bringing forward. That's all. I don't think that we need the full policy.
And maybe you have to call council members if you think it's a tough
Absolutely.
decision. I don't know. I mean, we can sit here all day and not make everyone happy.
sounds good.
Okay, clear as mud.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to finance, Measure P, Canada's report. Finance isn't here. Do you want to go over it, David, or do you want to?
Sure, it's primarily for information, we provide a report on the Measure P excise taxes that are collected by month, and it's in your packet.
Thank you. The water rate revenue tracking working.
It's exactly the same, again, it's more than anything, it's transparency, but it also provides just important information on the amount of revenue that we've collected, both in the current fiscal year, but the past 4 fiscal years. So just it's a good a tracking tool.
And the grant writing investments, options and tracking, do we need to, anything new that we need to discuss?
Nothing new there. We didn't have the most latest code enforcement, grant writing tracking worksheet to include in the packet. But that has been updated. It's an ongoing work in progress. We are currently in consultation or collaboration with the county and SMART working on a grant application for transportation related improvements. But there's just a lot in the works right now on the grants, and we just continue to update that, and we can share that with council as well and in the subcommittee.
Thank you. All right, R3C.
There's what's included in your packet are the meeting minutes from the last meeting that was held on Thursday, January 11th. They provide a really good overview of what was discussed. and kind of where the process is with respect to furthering the objectives of the R3C. The next meeting is March 14th, 11:30 to 1. Our city engineer has been attending and tracking progress on that.
Anything new on code enforcement?
Nothing new to report from code enforcement.
And then you want to do a budget update? I see.
Yeah, so this subcommittee has discussed over the last two meetings, we talked about primarily budget revenue, focusing on both property tax and sales tax. Following that meeting, we've since done two articles for the Cloverdale to Connect. One was for January, was really focused on the two-year budget process, and how we use revenue forecasts to help with establishing the revenue side of the budget. But it was more a focus on how the budget is developed, drafted, and the review and approval process, which includes a goal setting workshop and input from the community. And then the second article, which we should be seeing anytime in our mailboxes here shortly, was in regards to a more detailed, specific focus on both property taxes and sales tax. I know we wanted to provide a little bit of education to our residents about how both those tax schemes work and what ultimately is returned to the city in terms of revenue from the payment of property taxes and sales tax. We also took the opportunity to highlight our top 25 sales tax entities with some facts around how that constitutes nearly 80% of our sales tax revenue. Kind of a call to action is to, when at all possible, shop locally. It makes a difference because those only 1% approximately of the 8.25%, 8.5% that you pay comes back to the city. And it starts to highlight that while these are significant sources of revenue for the city, the cost of services continues to increase, and therefore, given the demands by the community for new or improved services, that we may be looking at a revenue measure in the future. So, kind of forecasting to the neighbors that they're made to our residents. That the council may take this up in the new year. So this was a focus of staff, was to really just provide education to our residents and our businesses about our two major revenue sources.
Great. Quick question on that, if I may. I know the answer to this. I just want to make sure. In the sales tax revenue, gasoline does not enter into that at all. Other than if they were if they had a convenience store or something.
Well, gas does generate. There's two types of taxes. There's the excise tax on gas that it is paid, and usually it's listed at the pump. But there's sales tax on top of that. So we as the city receive the sales tax on gasoline, and it constitutes
32% of the city's sales tax revenue. Service stations.
Well, you had number one listed, I think, was 7-Eleven.
Yeah, but further down the list, you also have the Sinclair service station that was a separate.
Those aren't in any order.
They're not.
No.
I thought they were. Okay,
Yeah, they're in alphabetical order.
gotcha. Okay.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
It's a good information. It shows how much
Isn't
we
it?
don't get.
Yeah, right.
And the graphic is always the best. I love that one. Every time I see it,
Yeah.
makes your skin crawl.
It's all part of the educational process if we go with a ballot initiative.
For sure.
And I'm hoping that we can get some of that. I think you and I talked about it, David, getting some of those printed up and ready to hand out at the counter. And even if Susie did one of her trifolds, you know, here's where our revenue comes from, you know.
Still no attendees, so we'll keep moving on. Police Department organization update.
All right, well, including your packet is a memo from our chief. Chief, you want to give an update on some of the organizational changes that you've made recently?
Sure. So over the last month or so, we've had testing for different positions within the that we opened up for the officers, trying to do some succession planning and enhance our investigative services. So we identified a detective, which is Katie Benoni. We think she'd be a good job in that position. She's already made connections with the FBI and DEA. She's working on the Sarah Gear case with Kevin Klein as well. So she hit the ground running there. Also, our school resource officer is Ricky Rhodes. I did add in here that I talked to Glenn, the superintendent at the school, and working at moving him in there 1 day a week. Hopefully even really quick here.
In uniform, chief?
Yes, yes, sir. We did testing. We had for sergeant, we had Katati PD, Ukiah PD, and Healdsburg PD come out and tested the officers for sergeant position. Sergeant Camara, John Camara came out number 1, and he'll be sworn in at the council meeting. On January 19th and 20th, we went to the academy and talked to affiliates in the police academy. There was about 5 or 6 or so folks that were not affiliated with any agency going through the academy that just started the week prior. That was on the 19th, and then on the 20th, they had a job fair for the academy that starts in April. And had a whole bunch of people talking to us. We had some interest. We'll schedule some ride-alongs, and we'll see how that goes. Pretty much it for me. I've been busy.
How's the new officer, working out, okay?
She's doing well.
Good.
She's in her second phase of training. She's training with Officer Ricky Rhodes right now. She's doing well. She's where she is expected to be.
I got a compliment from a friend. I don't know, he came home on Friday night a couple of weeks ago and he accidentally did something with his iPhone and he pushed the button and it dialed 911.
Huh?
So he said, "Oh, I'm okay, I'm okay." And he said about 10 minutes later, there was a knock on the door and there were 3 officers. 2 at the door and 1 back by the car. Just doing a wellness check. And he was really impressed that we followed up 911 calls like that.
10 minutes?
Huh?
32 minutes.
I know.
And the new officer was there and led the group.
Oh, nice.
You know,
Yeah,
she's talking.
Yeah, in phase 2, she started to take, take the initiative now.
Sort of.
Yeah, so she started to take the front role for the contact officer, so
Good.
she's getting familiar with that.
I'm glad to hear about the SRO.
Yeah.
That was gonna be my question to you today is how can we get them in for 1 or 2 days a week and start making it happen for the rest of the year? So you're already on.
Well, just so you know, that your message came through the city manager to me. So he is doing his job. And so, just trying to think outside the box and so we're coming up with that and so we're just figuring out a way, because they offered the 50,000, so okay, what does that equate to? You want to do some 1 day a week versus, 4 days, and so we're plugging right along.
Good, thank you. It's been 8 years in the making, and I've been pushing, I pushed longer, but 8 years since we said we would make it happen,
Yeah.
so to see this happening is bring tears to my eyes.
Yeah.
It's amazing, so thank you, I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, that's awesome. All right, moving on to future agenda items. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the items I would like to see us talk about at some point is our, delivering services to our communities without the, assets that we're used to. And I guess where I'm going with that is, you know, the big thing that I hear on the news and the talk shows right now is China's aggressiveness. And if things continue in the Middle East, it won't be long before China has to come down on one side or the other. And they've been known to take down utility companies, water companies. Are we protected that if something like that happens, we would be able to weather the storm and still deliver the services to our community? So I would just like some assurance that we're comfortable that if China was to knock down a satellite or get into our water plant, would we be able to overcome that quickly? So that was one thing. And I don't know, David, if it's Mr. Mayor, if it's an agenda item, or just here's something I'm comfortable with. And then lastly, Chief, I just more or less had a question for you. And it has to do with the southern border. You know, Texas is really kind of cracking down on it. And the activity is picking up now in California and in Arizona. And my question really isn't whether it's the right thing or not. Is Cloverdale being affected at all? Have you seen anything in Cloverdale because of the migration coming over the border?
No, we do have a group that comes and they stay over at the hotel right next to
The
Oaks.
Well, those are the
They're-
vineyard workers.
Those are vineyard workers.
Yeah.
They're taking back and forth, but I haven't seen an influx here.
Mhm.
Our Sonoma County policies, we cannot coordinate with the DEA.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, the ICE.
Yeah.
We do coordinate with the DEA. And we can't coordinate with ICE, so, you know, sometimes they share information, but we don't share with them.
Right.
Because we're barred from doing that, so, but I haven't seen anything.
Anything in the county, any other cities, Santa Rosa, Petaluma?
No, not as far as immigrants coming over. I haven't seen any like busloads of folks being dropped off or people like that.
We can continue to monitor, if there's issues arising relative to immigration, in Sonoma County, and if so, we'll bring it forward.
Yeah.
We'll bring forward a report, agendize it, just give an update
Yeah.
if it, rises.
Well, I think it's important that we keep an eye on it because apparently, they're not gonna come to any agreement anytime soon with new border policies or enforcing the ones we have. And like I said, I'm not here to judge whether they're right or wrong. I just want to know if we're gonna be affected by them. So we don't need 30 people living out in the plaza. That was it.
Okay, well, you're good, thank you, I appreciate that. The one thing I'm worried about is I've seen the kind of influx in our homeless again. It's been on the rise, and they're showing up here with stuff from southbound cities. And so I want to see if we can do a report that shows our service calls and things like that and outcomes. Really have some teeth when we go to the county and say, look, we're done with this, we need to move forward. And, you know, we're getting to that, we're beyond that point here, really. But, you know, it's when they tell you they're not going to do their job, we need to have a leg to stand on. I think this is where it starts, is you start showing us the stats. And effectively, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot because it's going to cost us money to be arresting people when they need to be arrested, but even if they're getting kicked out. But show we didn't arrest this time, but should have been, or these are the crimes committed, released, honestly, you know, I don't know, but we need to do something that shows that, because you can skew numbers by not arresting, so then your stats are down, and it doesn't help when the county says, well, you don't have a problem. Well, we don't have a problem because we bring them to you and then you release them instantly, and we get tired of the revolving door.
Yeah.
So when the county is telling me, sorry, we're not gonna touch it, we need to have some legs to stand on here. And I know that our community's getting pretty fed up and seems the influx is coming back. And we've done a good job of getting on top of it. We did have the best in the county and it's coming back around. So I don't want it to get ahead of us.
When you say the county doesn't want to get involved with reference to,
So I'll do one for instance, because it was the one that really chapped me. We had some private property areas in the county where a bunch of homeless moved in. Community members complained and the sheriff's office said, we don't see anybody living there. So they brought me out there the next day. I counted 5 tents from the edge of the bridge. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I can see further than they can. So I spoke to the lieutenant in charge and he wrote me a very long email about how it's a revolving door and I'm sorry, we can't go on private property and we can't do this. So I got him the paperwork that allowed him on the private property from private property owners. I had it to him within 10 minutes. And he's, I'm sorry, we're not going to go on private property. We're not going to do that because it's a waste of our time and I leave it up to my officer's discretion. So I actually wrote back and said, I can't believe you're throwing in the towel. If you want a white flag, I'll buy you one. I CC'd the sheriff at that point and said, let's really have a talk because this is unacceptable. So
about Gore, did you CC go on that?
Gore and Chris Grable are well informed. I'm leaving nobody out of the loop at this point, but I need more strength coming from our own staff and our own people, showing them what we're having to do. I mean, we had the one, for instance,
David.
yeah.
He was out that Saturday, we had the dog park.
So, yes, this gentleman, one of our local, was taken in on 5150, not supposed to be released by the county. Was released the same day.
Oh, geez.
Turned around the next morning, he's trying to light a car on fire at the cemetery. Gets taken in, I call the county services, they say, oh my God, he shouldn't have been out, we'll sit on him. We'll go in, out same day. Can't
Which one
do
is
this.
this, David?
We're on I don't know if we should be using full
Oh,
names,
oh,
but
oh.
I'll tell you after.
Yeah.
He's a well-known, I've known him since I was in kindergarten. So I'm very familiar and I know what his issues are. However, it's just unacceptable when they're doing these things and being let out.
Yeah.
And we need to help these people not keep revolving the door.
But that's why I'm so concerned too about some folks coming in from the southern border. Look what they did in New York to those 2 police officers. You know, they beat them and they're out, you know?
Yeah.
So,
For the officers too, it gets frustrating. They drop them off and.
Oh my God.
What about the
Report's done, yeah. It's ridiculous. It's beyond absurd. So I just want to do everything I can in my power to help you guys, basically, is what it is, and help our community at the same time.
And we have a homeless subcommittee scheduled for next Monday. I don't know if Chief, will you have time to put together?
Yeah.
What we'll be agendizing. Or the agenda will go out Thursday. I don't know, maybe you're not on that, but at least you could get the.
Yeah, I can still look at it and I can still watch. I just won't participate.
oh, I thought you were still on that committee.
No, sir, I don't think I am.
Marjorie and,
Yeah, Councilmember Morgenstern is the chair and Vice Mayor Wheeler is the vice chair.
But I will dare, I still am in contact with everybody. I'm on the county one, the North Sonoma County. So I'm still on that one. However, they don't meet very often anymore.
They give it up.
Basically. I'm hoping that, Portland, no. Grants Pass. I'm hoping that changes everything that goes on. Okay, any other future agenda items? Great, thank you for the long meeting and I appreciate you all being here. Meeting adjourned 3:57.